Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another ranked video. Today we're going to be talking about the Final Destination franchise. And there's currently a 6th film that's been in the works for years, and apparently it just recently finished shooting, with it set to be released sometime in the next year. So with there finally being a new entry in the franchise after well over a decade, I thought what better time than to go back and take a look and see how I personally would rank the previous 5 films. Now before we continue, as I always point out with my other list, it's important to remember this is just my personal list of the way that I would rank the Final Destination films. At number 5, right at the bottom of the barrel, is Final Destination 4, also known as The Final Destination. This movie honestly starts off pretty strong. All the Final Destination movies of course start with our big disaster piece where, something happens, a bunch of people die, and then someone of course, wakes up and it turns out that it was just a premonition, and they end up saving a bunch of people, and then it's about, who's gonna get killed and how they survive and whatever. It's more or less kind of the same concept but slightly different each movie. And with this one of course it's at a racetrack, and honestly even though it's completely bonkers, it's honestly pretty much just as good as most of the other opening sequences, so it's a solid start. Unfortunately from there it kind of just really starts to go downhill, and the problem with this one is that the kills are just completely utter ridiculousness. Most of them just are not believable at all and just completely laughable, and it feels like it's almost like a parody of a Final Destination movie instead of an actual Final Destination movie. But it's not even like a good parody, it feels like a bad parody of Final Destination. Kind of the problem with this one is that most of the other ones, particularly the first one, there was a certain level of kind of groundedness that at least they would try to have it be as realistic and believable as possible. But with this one it just feels like they stopped caring, and then they kind of try to save it by having the whole sequence at the end of the movie theater, and that just is kind of good, but it just doesn't make up for most of the rest of the movie. So Final Destination 4, or The Final Destination, is definitely at the bottom. And then up next we have Final Destination 3. It probably has, to me, one of the strongest openings of the entire franchise, which of course is the roller coaster sequence. As somebody who definitely does have a fear of roller coasters and heights, this probably is the most relatable, than other than maybe the plane in the first movie when it comes to all of the opening sequences in these films. A really solid opening and setting to start with, but unfortunately the problem with this one is that again it was very similar to, but not quite as bad as what was in the 4th movie, where it just a lot of the kills and stuff are really ridiculous, and it's kind of 50-50. There's some good moments and there's some other moments that are just completely laughable, and that plank just magically gets in between and lodges itself in between the two tanning beds. It's just like, what are we doing? Like that was pretty ridiculous. Not terrible either. It's kind of a bit of a mixed bag. It has some good moments and some not so great moments, but it really, to me, the highlight sequence is, the opening sequence of the roller coaster, which is very relatable. So that's Final Destination 3. And next up we have the most recent entry, Final Destination 5. Now I actually only just got around to seeing this one for the first time recently, because the 4th one was so terrible I just lost all interest in watching the 5th movie, especially after it came out not that long after the 4th movie. But when I finally did get around to watching this one, I have to say I was actually really pleasantly surprised. This one definitely did do a good job of trying to get back to the slightly more serious and groundedness that was in the first 2 movies. And overall it does do a very good job, and it definitely does have some of the best and most hard to watch kills in the entire franchise. But at the same time it also does kind of feel very much kind of bland, like it kind of struggles to add a lot of its own elements. And of all of the Final Destination sequels, this is the one that kind of felt most like a remake of the first film to me. It still is very fun overall, and slight spoilers spoilers for the ending of the film. If you haven't seen Final Destination 5 and don't want to be spoiled, I am going to spoil the ending of the movie, which of course is when they reveal that this is actually a prequel to the first movie and that they are on the plane. You think everything's alright, but they show that they're on the plane from the first one. The way they incorporate the footage from the first movie was really well executed and was honestly just a fantastic way to end the franchise. But of course, now we're getting a sixth movie, so oh well. Honestly, I would have been happy had they just left it here, and then going into this little compilation of all like the best kills from the previous movies with AC/DC blaring, and it was kind of honestly would have been a perfect way to end it. But again, like I said, we're gonna be getting a new one. I really enjoy it overall. I think it did a solid job of kind of getting the balance back to what it should have been in the third and fourth movies, so I thought it was really good. So that's Final Destination 5. At number 2, we have Final Destination 2. This one, to me, is definitely easily the one that gets the closest to being on the same level as the first film. But ultimately, and I think this is a problem with all of the Final Destination sequels, is that it really shouldn't have been a franchise in the first place. Like, they really did struggle to franchise this thing, because it's one of those things where once you've done the concept once, it's really difficult to try to do it again and really do something new with it. And the only thing that they could really do new every single time was the opening sequence. And for a lot of people, you know, the opening sequence on the highway with the logging truck and everything is definitely one of the best in the entire franchise. A lot of people would put it above the plane sequence in the original movie. To me, you know, as somebody who does have a fear of flying, that still slightly beats it out. But this is definitely a really, really great one. This is where they were starting to get into a little bit more of a silly, sort of more, you know, kind of far-fetched direction compared to the first film. But for the most part, it is still pretty grounded, honestly. And it actually, you know, the way that they executed it, like, there is still very much a feeling that they were trying to make it as tangible as possible. So it definitely, compared to all of the other sequels, is the one that I feel, you know, works the strongest. So it's a really solid movie, not quite as good as the first one, but definitely a lot of fun. So that's Final Destination 2. And then, of course, at number 1 is the original Final Destination. It's just a really, really solid, great horror film overall. Some people even go as far as to say it's one of the greatest horror movies of all time. I personally wouldn't go quite that far. I do think it is definitely one of the best to come out in the era that it came out in, and it definitely still works really well even today. Concept was still done the best, I think, in this one. There was a certain level of, in the way that it was executed, that just works a lot better in this one when you compare it to the sequels. All the sequels just kind of have this feeling like they're imitating the first movie, and I honestly feel this way more about the Final Destination franchise than most other franchises, that I think they just had a really difficult time turning this into a franchise. And the first movie, again, it still is the one that I think works the best out of all of them. And again, that plane sequence, the first time I saw this movie, as somebody who has a fear of, you know, flying and a fear of planes, just completely blew my mind. And again, the kills and stuff in this, they're not, you know, there's some of them maybe a little bit far-fetched, but again, the way that it's executed is really, really well done. And again, it works a lot better, even when, you know, going and watching the sequels and then coming back to the original, it still feels and works the best, I would say, in the original film when you compare it to the other ones. So it's a great film that's, you know, still the strongest entry of a franchise that probably shouldn't have been a franchise in the first place, but it is, so here we are. Alright guys, that was the way that I would rank the Final Destination franchise. Feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know how you would rank the Final Destination movies. And until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.